Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to talk about something today that many of us have had challenges from, but we might not even know it. And when I say these four letters, many of us do associate it with one particular situation, and that's true, but not everything. I'm talking about PTSD. So when you hear those letters, many of us right away think about our military, and certainly lots of PTSD coming from that. But we all, I believe, and I want to get her read on it, suffer from PTSD in one shape or form, whether it's major or not, but it's still there. Let's dig into that today. I think we're going to have some epiphanies, maybe some surprise moments here of what's going on in our lives. She is the woman behind a wonderful counseling center in Massachusetts called New Beginnings Center. And she is back with us as our Diamond of the Decade. Sherri Ann Alexandrovich joins us on the program. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
Terrific.
Good, good.
Happy we're talking about this.
Yeah.
It's okay. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay.
hmm
Do I have that right?
Yes. Yep.
How do you define it? Let's go there.
So I think in its most basic definition, it would be that we have either experienced or witnessed an event in our life that has been so impactful that it has shaped either how we look at things or how we feel about things today. And so that can range from a variety of different events or things that we've witnessed, depending on how we handle it. So I think that that's different. It's all about perception. And I've worked, you and I have talked about perception in the past. When somebody perceives something, that could be different for every individual. And so there are some people who they could witness a carjacking and they could suffer PTSD from that, and other people would witness the same event and it would not be as impactful. So that's what I mean when I say that it really kind of varies from person to person. And that goes into a variety of different factors as well. We have the resiliency gene, and we have a couple of different things if depending on how you were raised, what your own experiences have been, and
Hmm.
that will shape how you would interpret or experience something moving forward. Does that make sense?
It does, and a wake up for me because I've done
Okay.
lots of podcasts on trauma, and
hmm
we've identified what I call the big T trauma, the little T trauma. Not minimizing anything, but
hmm
some things are smaller than others, but they can have the same kind of impact.
Right.
Um, but never truly internalize the T in PTSD, post traumatic
Mm,
stress disorder.
right.
So when you break it down that way, we've said before, we all have trauma. We all deal with some.
hmm hmm
I'm going to say we all have PTSD.
Mm.
Would that be fair enough to say in one way or another with whatever the situation might be? And again, I'm not minimizing anything,
hmm
but if you've suffered some type of trauma in your life, much of it is growing up. Um, Safe to say that we might have PTSD.
hmm I think that there is probably a large number of us that have experienced some traumatic event in our life, and that varies from, could be from a car accident to, witnessing an overdose to rape to war. I think that there's just a variety of different child abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse. I mean, there's such a large gamut of topics that could go under the PTSD. And then again, it also, a lot of the factors are how are we perceiving it as individuals, and our past experiences with conflict or trauma or abuse really will weigh pretty heavily into how we perceive it today as well. And I think that whenever we have these moments where our perception of something seems to be really amplified and our our outcome or our response to something is disproportionate to the event, I think that's always something that we should pay attention to and kind of take a step back and say, you know what, maybe that response to that particular event was a little bit larger than what it should be. And typically because there's something else that's going on underneath it. And I think one of the large areas for us is a lot of pre-verbal trauma. And I think that's one of the most difficult ones to really not just access, but also to treat. Because as children or infants or 1, 2 years old, 3 years old, even 4 years old, we have very limited memories of things that we experience. But those experiences don't go away. We feel them in our body. Our body keeps score. Our body understands and remembers whatever it is that it's experienced, but our brains may not be able to identify or attach to that particular event. Do- and-
So does that mean, all right, for example, let's say somebody got bullied when they were a kid. They're 7 years old, eight, whatever. Um, it can be impactful. Let's say it continued for a while as they're growing up. Later in life, somehow it impacts them as adults. They might not even realize it, but that traumatic experience is, lack of a better description, getting in the way of life as an
Mm.
adult.
Mhm.
Is that PTSD?
That could be a form of PTSD. It depends on how bad the bullying was and how that particular individual experienced it. Because two
Sure.
people, there could be two kids, two 8-year-old kids, both being bullied, and even one that was bullied worse than the other. Say kiddo A and kiddo B. Kiddo A may suffer longer effects of that than kiddo B, even if the bullying was not worse. And that really just depends on what type of coping skill that particular kid has in order to be able to adapt to it. But I think that all of us will have some level of a trigger. And I think that might be where you might be going with this is
Mm,
as adults, we become easily triggered over a past event that we've experienced. And we may not know where that comes from
sure.
or why we're feeling super heightened or super triggered over that. But I think that whenever we have any of that like internal dysregulation, that's a time for us to kind of stop and say, geez, when was there a time where I felt helpless or hopeless or not in control? And that could have been a bullying experience that we had when we were 8, 9, or 10 years old. And not really being able to tie that because that could be 20 years later. But we find that we've always been maybe an advocate for other people who have been bullied. And where does that come from, right? Not wanting other people to have that same experience that we've had. And I think at the same sense too is that some people grow up and repeat that pattern. They perpetuate the abuse because that's all they know. And for them, that's how they're making sense of or re-establishing how they're processing their own trauma. And so as adults, and we look at parents that perpetuate abuse, or parents that break the cycle of abuse, or parents that just grow up and self-medicate because of the abuse. There's so many different avenues that we can take how we're going to cope with whatever that traumatic event is. And that's why this topic is so important. And it's so important to really kind of take a step back into the childhood and where this is coming from because the majority of what we've experienced happen in those formative years. And that's when a lot of us really don't know how to make sense of things.
Hmm. And spot on there because those two 8-year-olds bullied.
Yeah,
Um, One could roll right after over their shoulder. The other one, they could be walking around as an adult, feeling not worthy enough, maybe abandoned too. I was left alone. I got bullied, um,
right. Rejected,
rejected. Right? Sure, without
not
a
being
doubt.
good enough. Hmm.
Mm. But you would say that is a form of PTSD. That's what it's.
I would say that if it's impacting them today, and I think that's
Yes.
the key, the key sentence there is is that event still impacting us in some way today? And that will be whether or not it kind of fits that criteria of the PTSD. Because some of us have these experiences that might have been pretty powerful or impactful, but it's no longer affecting us today. And so that wouldn't qualify as a PTSD because it doesn't mean that that event was not traumatic in its time. It
Sure.
means that today it's not impacting us. And so that's kind of the key difference is as who we are today as adults, is that particular experience or event still impacting either who we are today, how we're going to deal with something today, or in our future? And that really is what qualifies into that PTSD definition.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And the S in PTSD, stress,
Yeah.
how does that tie into all of this?
Well, there are some stressful events that really are like COVID. So there is a stressful event that has impacted so many people, even still today. I mean, think about society as how we're operating today and how
Hmm.
we operated 5 years ago. I mean, look at, for instance, we have this weekly Zoom meeting. We didn't really, Zoom was not really that big of a thing 5 years ago. And so there's kind of been some pros and cons to COVID and the outcomes of that. I mean, the Zoom world has opened up, and that has then now given us the opportunity to reach people in so many different ways and so much more effectively because people who had transportation issues before now have the opportunity to attend therapy or to attend a medical appointment or a psychiatry appointment via Zoom, whereas before we didn't. But then on the flip side of that, so many people lost their jobs, their houses, their finances. People had passed away and died. So those stressful events very likely could have caused a lot of that PTSD for a lot of individuals today. I
Yeah.
mean, COVID's just been forever changing in our society.
Look at even children. Life
Yeah.
changed, didn't go to school for half a year. Even when they did, it was different.
Yeah.
And many children are still dealing with that later because it just
Right.
turned their world upside down. Then other things around them may have happened, family changes, job changes, all of that. Um, Very impactful, the stress.
For sure. I mean, there was chunks of time, I think, educationally that the kids lost out on. As hard as the teachers worked, and God bless them because my God, they did such an amazing job during COVID of trying to engage our kids. I mean, so my grandson 5 years ago, I mean, he was first grade when COVID hit, and going through trying to engage a classroom full of 6 and 7 year olds, I can't even imagine the job that was kind of put upon the teachers in general, but then the socialization piece of it, the kids who started high school or started their first 2 years of college and had to do it via Zoom. I mean, there are so many things that COVID ended up impacting for society. It was really, really isolating for a lot of people. I mean, uh, we couldn't go to work. We couldn't go out to the grocery stores, and people had masks on. I mean, we couldn't even see people smiling for years. It was really, I mean,
Mm,
think about how difficult for a child it is to go out in public and not being able to even read facial cues. How do they learn? That's how young adults learn is by reading social cues and picking up on what's going on for other people. And if we take that away and we mask everybody, what are we left with?
mm.
So much left for interpretation of how other people are thinking or feeling, or that socialization piece of it is just gone.
What's what's the therapy? What's the counseling when somebody it's identified they have PTSD? And
Mhm.
every situation is different. Everybody
Mhm.
is different. But
Right, right.
as a rule of thumb, baseline protocol, how do you work somebody through that?
Mhm. So I typically will start with a timeline. And so EMDR, which is, I've talked a little bit about this before, and this is a new kind of type of therapy that I absolutely love. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And part of that, what I love so much about the EMDR with PTSD is that it's a way for us to go back and process without actually reliving. And sometimes reliving that experience is too much for somebody to talk about. So with the EMDR, what we can do is we can help us to reprocess without actually talking about it. So as the client in the EMDR process, we don't have to verbalize what's going on inside of our brain in order for us to process it. And the therapist doesn't have to know specifically what's going on inside of our brain. It's really just about guiding through those moments that are so traumatic and being able to reprocess it using eye movement. Now, I know that that's a form of therapy that isn't super popular and there's not a lot of people that do it, but the other types of trauma-focused therapy are also going back and, those timelines are important. Jotting down what is the event, understanding how does trauma impact us, the trauma brain. So sometimes I will draw a picture of, a circle of the brain and explain to some of my younger kids or my teenagers how we then process information. So it will come into the top of the brain and whatever that event is, and then it goes through. And so as we're processing and it's coming through, before we can articulate it, it's going to go through and hit some of that swamp. It's going to hit the sludge. It's going to come through all of that dark stuff that we've experienced, and how it comes out is going to be kind of a subset of that. And that's where we have to kind of go back in through that swamp and pull out all of that stuff that's murking up the waters, and be able to process through that one event at a time. And again, that looks different for everybody depending on what that trauma was or how deep that trauma is.
Hmm.
And it's just a lot of it is, if we leave it in a closet and then we just take it out once in a while, it stays preserved, it stays fresh. If we talk about it, then it just becomes part of it, it almost becomes like a story. So it no longer is as impactful. And I think that's one of the messages I'd love to get across to people is the importance of talking about and emptying out that closet with those demons. Because if we leave them in there and we pretend they're not there, they're not
Hmm.
going anywhere. And
Well,
they
it's like everybody says, you can't ignore the elephant in the room.
right.
Well, the elephant is in your mind and you can't ignore it. Well, you can, but
Yeah.
maybe if you want to be happy and productive and
Mhm.
move your life forward. EMDR, eye movement. Always wondered about this. Truly have always wondered. How does the eye movement technique change things?
So your brain is processing what's going on. And so Shapiro was the founder of this, and she had, and it just came about because she was watching tennis, and the ball was going back and forth, and she had just found out that she had cancer, and as she was thinking about it and kind of doing her own processing about it, she's watching the tennis match, and as she's watching it, she noticed a shift in how the eye movement goes back and forth, and how that just changes the way our brain is processing something. It's really such a unique concept. And sometimes you can, I mean, I'm trained in EMDR, and I've gotten, I think, 6 or 7 of my clinicians now trained in EMDR, but I've also taken EMDR as a client at the same time. So I've had the
Hmm.
experience from both a clinician and as a client. And I'll tell you, it has been the most amazing experiences, both as a clinician to watch and as a client to experience, and how it just shapes and changes the way that you perceive something or you think about something. There's other techniques called flash, which is a little bit different than the EMDR. It's really what you're doing is you're kind of just altering the way your brain is wired, and is really recalling that particular event. Progressive counting, that's another one. There's a lot of really cool techniques in which you can do to help. shape the brain just a little bit differently. Because if you think about it, what has trauma done? Trauma has reshaped our brain. And if we can shape it back or alter it just a little bit differently, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about our brains is that as much as we can learn things, we can also not unlearn them, but shape them and change them and take that lesson and incorporate it into another piece of something so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming or it doesn't feel so scary.
How does this process work? Let's say we're talking about the bullying situation,
Okay.
so we'll sit on that one. Um, Now somebody identifies that it's bullying, that they have these feelings of not good enough, self-esteem. Now MDR comes in.
Mm-hmm.
How do we pinpoint using MDR the bullying situation? We could have a ton of things wrong with us. I don't want to say wrong, but a ton of things that affect us, from childhood, right? Bullying being one of them. How do we laser in EMDR on the bullying?
So what you have to do with the EMDRs is a process. And so you wouldn't just go right in and you wouldn't just attack the bullying. You would have to do the timeline. There's a lot of steps that go prior to that because what's going to happen is the bullying is impacting you because you've had a prior experience with somebody either putting you down or not treating you well.
All right, well let's jump into that one, Era. Okay.
Okay.
So it's potentially not just the bullying. Let's say you were 8 when that took place.
Mhm.
Are you saying that there was something before that that fortified, that made the impact of the bullying even stronger?
Correct.
I'm
Yes.
right on your page with that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because there you
Because
go. I don't mean to cut you off, but you said it before. Child A, child B, both 8 years old, right?
Mhm.
Child A, whatever, no problem, go away, you don't bother me. Child B, it has really beat them up figuratively and literally on the playground. And now they've taken that with them for the rest of their lives. Why did it affect B instead of A? Because child B, maybe they had something else happen in their life prior to that, maybe a parental situation, whatever it might be. Wow.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so the that's why the important thing is to kind of like do go back, right, and do that timeline. And so, the EMDR it's a process. So there's a lot of steps that you go through before you would really kind of tie into the bullying situation. So that's just such a bigger, more in-depth type of therapy. But if I were to treat not using EMDR and I were to treat a kiddo that came in that was 8 and he was being bullied and really not wanting to go to school anymore and not wanting to leave their room, or they've got all these somatic symptoms that come along with it, headaches, stomach aches, throwing up, that type of thing. So that would be a kind of a different approach. So you would treat the biggest symptom first so that you could get their life manageable. So if it's they can't leave the house, then you would start working on what does that look like? Why can they not leave the house? And then at the same time, we're also doing some self-esteem building. We're doing some self-awareness. We're doing some strength building. We're, putting some coping skills in that are going to help them. And, last week we talked a little bit about what those affirmations are and the importance of that positive self-talk. That all really fundamentally is the core of what we want to start building is all of that positivity for these kids so that they now have the strength to then go in and look at things a little bit differently. So now we've kind of like taken their foundation and we've strengthened it so that we can build upon it, so that it doesn't feel so overwhelmed or so scary to talk about, because it might be that the bullying at school is the surface,
Mm, mm.
but maybe at home, right?
Yes.
There's something going on that they don't feel safe to talk about or that they can't articulate or they're afraid.
Wow. You're great at what you do. I gotta
Yeah.
tell you, you make it so clear, and I say this every time we get together, just prior to getting together here. I say, do we think we can fill a half hour talking about PTSD or whatever the topic is? And you're like, yes,
Yeah.
and you're always right. Amazing, amazing. This is just a piece of what you offer with your center. Uh, it can be done virtually as well. What's the website? Best way to find you?
Newbeginningswc.com is our website. And we do telehealth, not for under the age of 12, though. So I'm pretty particular about that only because, we've had our experiences during COVID, and it's really difficult, I think, to engage the use in telehealth. And so we did what we had to do when we had to. But now, I would prefer that anybody under the age of 12 come into our office, or we see them school-based as well, and that's fine. But, sometimes it's hard to get those kids, because a lot of play therapy is involved when you're working with kids under the age of 12. You're playing cards, you're playing chess, you're strategizing, you're doing art therapy, you're doing dance movement
Even
therapy.
the attention,
Right.
and so many times kids
Yeah.
will, when they were doing virtual classes, they just
Right.
had to sit there. They weren't really engaging. They were just listening.
Right.
So, and I've heard that from others that do what you do, that, if it's a child or a tween, if you will, that
Mhm.
it should be in person. Your website?
I'm sorry?
What's your website?
Oh, newbeginningswc.com.
Gotta tell you, Sherri Ann, always great talking with you. Thank you for today. So important. This is just we always knew it was connected to the military, PTSD. But I don't think many until today realize that we're affected in different ways, not taking anything away from our service people, which
Right,
we
absolutely.
adore for what they do and have done. But this stuff is real. Appreciate it.
It
Thank
is
you
real,
so much.
absolutely. It impacts us as a whole.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much.
We'll catch up next time. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.